So for the past week and a half or so, I've been busy playing Atomic Heart. I actually just completed the game yesterday, so wanted to give my review out for the game. This game is very interesting. So I went into it kind of expecting this more spiritual successor to the original BioShock. And if you've seen any of the original gameplay, that's kind of what the game kind of, evoked. That it was this really interesting horror action shooter. You're going through this, mid 1950s Soviet Union like world, and it's all technologically advanced, and there's killer robots and genetic mutations and all this scary stuff that you're fighting off. So the game really looked like it was in the vein to be this almost BioShock successor. And BioShock, for me, just speaking on this briefly, was one of the most profound and just incredible gameplay experiences that I've ever had in my entire life. And honestly, you can play the game to this day and recognize all the great qualities that it has with its storytelling and its gameplay and the visuals and stuff like that. So you can recognize those elements today, but without having played it when it was new and relevant in that time frame of 2007, the impact that that particular franchise had on all of gaming, and especially during the time when it came out, is kind of lost on you. And the thing is, we haven't really had a game like BioShock come out since, We've had games that have tried to, take inspiration from many different elements of its design and kind of inject them into their own experiences, but there hasn't really been a game that's kind of elicited that same feeling of exploring this really imaginative place, and there's a horror element and there's an action, shooter element, and it all just meshes together to create this really compelling experience. And I can't think of any game last generation. Maybe Control was like the closest experience to kind of, eliciting that same feeling, but that's a very different game. And when I saw Atomic Hearts for the first time, the gameplay 5 or 6 years ago, that to me was the first thing I noticed. I was like, wow, this looks to me like it could be the next BioShock-esque type experience that really just provides this very interesting story, this very interesting world, and this really cool gameplay, just to create something that's very unique and very transformative and impactful. And now that I played Atomic Heart, and I just completed the game yesterday, I spent about 30 hours in the entire game from start to finish. Now that I played it, I have to say that this game, Atomic Heart, was not what I was expecting. This game took me completely by surprise and actually ended up shattering all of my expectations. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing, not bad at all. And I still feel that this game is one of the more standout experiences that I've had recently with gaming, and one that everyone should at least give a try. So in this video, we're going to break down all the different elements of the gameplay that I like and the things that I feel need to be improved if they're going to move forward with this as a new franchise for the developer. And we'll break all that down in this video here. So before we get down to doing that, I just want to add some things for clarity here. One, I unboxed the game earlier in February when it came out on Xbox Series X. I since returned that copy and got myself a PS5 copy. The reason for that is that the Xbox Series consoles, apparently for Atomic Heart, had some frame rate issues and dips. And so, that being said, I wanted to make sure, having both systems, that I have the most, smoothest gameplay experience possible. So I returned the Series X copy and ended up getting a PlayStation 5 version, which apparently was much smoother than the Xbox Series X version, at least at launch. I did play it, and I didn't notice anything in the way of really massive frame rate drops, maybe a handful of moments where things did dip, but it wasn't really anything, it wasn't like an issue, let's just say. But I'll touch upon that more when I talk about the quality of this game later on in this review. The second thing I wanted to say is that I played this game entirely with Russian voiceover and English subtitles. I sort of took a similar experience to how I played the Yakuza games, where, a lot of the more modern Yakuza titles that are released today are localized in English, and you can play them with English voiceover, but I still choose to play those games in Japanese. And with Atomic Heart, I took a similar approach. The Russian language is the native language of the game. It's the intended experience by the developers. And so that being said, said, I wanted to make sure that I kind of experienced the game, with the most intended experience possible, at least from my perspective. So I played the game entirely with Russian VO and English subtitles. So my thoughts on the story and the voice acting, which you probably heard some people criticize, are probably going to be very different to most people who played this game in English specifically because of that reason. Okay, so I'll touch upon that more when we talk about the story for this game. So right off the bat, I have to say that the initial 4 to 6 hours of this game are phenomenal. It places you into this world and kind of introduces you slowly into its atmosphere. You're going kind of through this parade, which is a celebration of the technological advancements of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party and all this stuff. And it just really does a great job of just capturing this vivid imagination, the creativity of this world, and you just feel like you're in the heart of something truly monumental. And again, there's lots of people, the robots are there as well, like kind of marching through like an army. It really kind of sells this really unique atmosphere and just paves way into you being immersed in this very creative and provocative world. And so, initially when you're playing this game, you're going through this space, and afterwards you're kind of transitioned into a more linear type structure where you're going through this abandoned laboratory that's kind of been overrun with some killer robots, and you have to find out what's happening there. The game has this very mysterious element, and it kind of leads you on into a direction, and it kind of has some twists and turns in between to kind of, again, push things in a slightly different direction than what you were kind of expecting. And so the initial couple hours of this game are really fantastic, and they introduce you into this world and do a phenomenal job in terms of capturing just the essence and the time period, and just really having this unique creative twist on everything. And essentially after that, the game does something I was not expecting whatsoever. It opens up. You basically emerge from this laboratory, and the game becomes Far Cry almost. You actually have this large hub space world. I'm not going to call it open world because it's not open world in the sense that you're going to be revisiting locations and going from one far side to the map to the other. It's not massive like that. This isn't... It's not like a Far Cry or Ubisoft style world. It's more of a hub space with different structures and laboratories that are placed within this facility, and you're making your way through kind of in a straightforward fashion, going through these different spaces, these different facilities, and kind of following the story along as well. And there's optional stuff to do. This is where the game kind of took me by surprise, because I was not expecting this to be a part of the gameplay at all. In fact, when you see the initial gameplay for this game and you just watch some of the gameplay trailers, it kind of gives you the feeling that this is going to be a horror-esque action shooter. You're going to be going through, these really creative laboratories and hallways and facilities and stuff like that. But you're inside some structure, and there's killer robots and weird mutant organic mutations, and just these really elaborate puzzles and stuff like that. The game doesn't really give you the sense that it actually has some exploration to it, and basically allows you to kind of go off and do your own thing almost in this very disorganized and free like structure. But this is very much a part of the game, and to me this is when the game becomes substantially less interesting, unfortunately, because while you're going through these laboratories and you're just seeing these incredible, whether it's architecture, different robots or different rooms or offices, whatever the case may be, you're going through this space and you're just like wowed because the atmosphere is so well done inside these buildings. And then all of a sudden you emerge from that, and you're basically in this space with this forest, there's lakes, there's people's houses, and you're kind of exploring and gathering materials, and then there's just robots kind of on patrol. The game feels substantially less interesting when it kind of brings things up to the surface, and you're kind of just going through, again, this space, kind of doing what you normally would do in a game that has a hub-like structure like this game. It was a bit disorienting after playing again 4 to 6 hours of the game, and then you emerge into in the game. It kind of just lets you do whatever you want after that. It's a bit like, the game just completely changes genres like on the fly. So this to me, I feel, and I'll discuss this a little bit more later, because I feel like on a pacing perspective, this game does have some issues because it doesn't exactly, it switches genres really quickly and doesn't exactly know how to do one thing. Well, I shouldn't say it doesn't know how to do one thing. It just does a lot of different things and does some things very well. But I feel like this game is almost a victim of its own ambition, right? Like it was trying to be something totally unique, something totally unlike anything out there, and just be this mashup of a collection of different games. And then, in the end, this game kind of becomes something that, you really enjoy certain parts of it, but there are other parts where you feel things could have been sped up, or things could have just been, laid out just a lot better in a more organized fashion, as to not allow for a more slower paced experience like this game kind of gives you when it transitions to, the more open world. So that being said, when after that initial 4 to 6 hours, when I first emerged from this space, I felt very overwhelmed, because you look at the size of this world. Again, it's not open world, but it's more of a giant hub, but it's massive in scale. It would probably take me 15 minutes, I would expect, to basically run from one end of the corner to the other on the map. So, it's large enough to the point where it feels substantial, but it's not just completely overwhelming where it's going to take you forever to get to one space from the other. And again, the game has its narrative kind of paced out in an orderly fashion. So there is optional stuff to do in the open world, but the story will lead you through the map in kind of a straight line. So you don't need to kind of explore far off in the corner, because you never go there within the story. The story will take you to the places and sort of the main, I guess the more popular, more interesting places throughout the main narrative. But that being said, there is optional stuff to do here. So there are dungeons in this open world. Essentially what they are massive bunkers with a bunch of puzzles to solve. And solving these puzzles gets you upgrade components and blueprints to craft more interesting and better upgrades for your weapons. And these actually make a substantial difference in the way that your guns actually feel. And not only do they make a substantial difference in the way that they feel, but they also cosmetically look very different to how you got them originally when you started unlocking these weapons. So you want to do these puzzles, these bunkers, basically, because it's how you get all the upgrades in the game. And you're going to want these upgrades because it dramatically changes up the way that the guns feel, and actually the pacing of the gunplay itself. It really does matter. It's at this point, though, the game actually changes genres yet again and basically becomes Portal. The puzzles aren't quite as interesting, I would say, but they are very, very cool, and involve you kind of changing rooms. You'll see like more magnetism type puzzles where you'll have to actually use magnets to move certain structures in the certain areas and use them as basically lifts for you to actually almost kind of parkour your way through one end to the other in a room. You'll see other puzzles that basically involve you trying to heat up generators, and you have to use telekinesis to like move this coolant or this heat orb or something to one of the generators to change the temperature differences. There's other puzzles that are involved with you actually rotating rooms around in this really weird fashion. This game has a lot going for it, as you can probably tell from me talking about it. It's got a lot in here, and I will say, though, never at one point do you ever feel bored when playing this game, because it changes things up quite dramatically. I would really say the only boredom that you really get is just the pacing of being in this open world structure, because you're just making your way to these facilities, You're trying to kind of avoid enemies, and yeah, in order to get to these bunkers and these more puzzle rooms to get those upgrades, there are a series of steps you need to take in order to unlock them. You can't just go there. You can't just go to the door, open it, and all of a sudden you take the elevator down and you're there solving puzzles. There's actually a bit of a step that you have to take to actually use the security cameras to unlock the doors and to get there in interesting ways. Sometimes the rooms are not accessible, but you have to use your creative imagination to sort of get around there. So there's a lot going on in this game, guys, that it's just, for me to sit here and say, oh yeah, it's kind of BioShock with a Soviet Union-like twist, and it's with robots in the mid-1950s, it's not that. It's partly that, and then it's like so much more. It's basically that Far Cry, and Portal mashed up in this really unique, bizarre experience. So I mean, you're gonna be quite you're gonna be kind of changing what you're going to be doing in the game quite a lot, and the game will change genres on a moment's notice. But hey, you know, it's exciting. That's the thing I'll say, is you're never going to be bored. You're never going to be bored by what you'll see. It's always got some type of creative twist, something imaginative, something interesting to look at when you're actually there doing whatever it is the hell that you're doing. So if I didn't confuse you about what the experience is like for Atomic Heart, let me talk about the gunplay of this game. It's the core of basically the whole combat of the game. You basically have melee focused combat and then your guns and stuff. I gotta say, the developers nailed this, man. This might be one of the most recent games I play. Actually, I think not since even Wolfenstein: The New Order. That was like the last game I can think of. They got the responsiveness, the inertia, the balance of the controls, the way the guns feel. Everything is perfect. This might be some of the most finest handling gunplay I've ever played in a first-person shooter. And I'm not just saying that, you know, there's a fine line between getting the gunplay right in games. Guns, you have to feel that kickback. You have to feel like you feel every single bullet leaving the chamber of the gun. You have to also make it lightweight and responsive enough to the point where it feels like you're controlling a person, but you're not just like a feather flying through the map like you do in Call of Duty. It's like a very fine line that you have to do. It's this really interesting balance that you have to get right between getting the gunplay feel right and the control of the character. Man, they nailed it here. If this game wasn't even you know, it's very action heavy on the shooting elements, so I can't even say that. But even if it was a slower paced game, like even if the game was just linear in structure and you're just fighting a couple robots at a time, this is still one of the best handling first-person shooters I played in recent memory in a long time. Again, I think not since Wolfenstein: The New Order was like the last one in 2014 that I played. That was almost 10 years ago, as just being one of the most responsive and well-handling first-person shooters that I've played. Atomic Heart is phenomenal in that respect. Each of the weapons have their own unique twist. On the PS5, you do get the trigger-sensitive buttons and responses and stuff like that. They do a good job making sure that it doesn't get into the way of making the gunplay feel tedious or making your finger feel tedious when you're firing weapons. And again, doing the puzzles and the bunkers and unlocking all the upgrades dramatically changes up the way that your guns feel. And so if you get too much recoil on one of your weapons, you can switch out parts and craft different components and just, upgrades for your weapons that just make the guns feel very smooth and very responsive to control, higher rate of fire, more damage, whatever the case may be. I unlocked all the weapons during my playthrough of the game, except some of the more melee-focused ones, which I found myself not really utilizing as much. But basically, there's probably about, 10 or so weapons in the game. Most of them are guns, and then you have a collection of different hand-to-hand melee combat weapons and like batons and saws and stuff that you can actually craft to make the melee combat feel a little bit more responsive, fast-paced, or more heavy, depending on what you're kind of looking for, what your playstyle is. But all the guns in this game feel fantastic. There's energy weapons, there's more ballistic weapons, and all of them just feel fantastic. There's a rocket launcher with homing missiles you can get that just is really, really cool. Charging weapons, just all this cool stuff. I will say, however, the design of the weapons doesn't seem nearly as interesting as what we initially saw with that gameplay. So they got the axe weapon in there from the initial gameplay like 5 or 6 years ago. But some of the weapons, the shotgun and the pistols, look dramatically different and I would say less creative than those weapons that we initially saw in the actual gameplay demo. A minor criticism based on the creativity of what they decided to go with, but regardless, the way that each of these weapons feel is fantastic. Again, one of the most finest handling, one of the most responsive first-person shooters that I played in a very, very long time. There's dodging as well. You can do like almost like Doom. You can basically dodge in midair, and you can use it to cross larger gaps when you're kind of doing the more traversal platforming element of this game's experience. there's just a lot of cool stuff, and the boss fights are fantastic in this game. I actually never died to any of the bosses, not once. Not to say that they weren't difficult. They kind of telegraph their moves, and they're really kind of large in scale, and they take up the whole entire, arena of basically what you're fighting. But it's here that the game kind of turns into almost like Doom, where you're kind of moving around the map, and it's like almost like a strafe shooter where you have to like run around and dodge projectiles, and the enemies will sometimes create like this ring that kind of expands. You have to jump over it and dodge it like a classic shooter. It's fantastic. The gunplay, I cannot speak enough about how great this game feels to actually play, especially when you get all the upgrades, and just the pacing of the actual action of the game is phenomenal. That being said as well, I initially had a criticism because this game has an always-on sprint, meaning the moment that you push forward on the analog stick, your character's in just a sprint immediately. There is no kind of walk. Unless you, again, just you have to manipulate the analog stick to be a little bit slower than you normally would. But there's basically an always enabled sprint option, like an auto sprint option. I initially didn't like that, but after playing through this game some more and now completing the game after almost 30 hours, I have to say that it was the right decision. It actually makes the combat a lot more quicker. It makes it less of a hassle because you don't have to remember the sprint. You're always kind of perpetually sprinting, and it just makes everything feel a lot more quicker and more responsive without having to worry about using a sprint function. So it doesn't do well when you're kind of exploring the world in a slower pace, but when you're kind of just fighting off against tons of enemies around you, that feature does come in handy, and you can't disable it. That's just the way that the game handles, and it was the right decision. So it's an initial criticism that I had that after playing more of the game, I kind of reneged on. So this game is worth playing just for the action alone, quite honestly. And there's a lot of different enemy types that take full advantage of your arsenal, so it's not just kind of robots coming at you in a straight line. These guys move quick. There's more aerial robots and stuff like that. Again, you have powers as well. You have different powers. I didn't even touch upon this because the gunplay feels so good anyway, but you actually have different powers, kind of similar to how BioShock works, where you can use basically you have like this magic glove with an AI built into it. You can shock enemies, you can freeze enemies, you could, levitate enemies, you could do all this really cool stuff. I ended up actually not using these powers as much as I thought. The shock was definitely the most useful because you'll also be using it to solve certain puzzles. And the freeze does come in handy when you're kind of with a lot of enemies at once. You can kind of freeze everyone and, halt people from basically attacking you. But I honestly didn't use these powers as much as I thought I would. The game it gives you like a set of 5 different powers that you can use. I probably used 3 of them, and at the end you could only equip 2. So I just ended up using the ones that I felt were more useful to me in my situation. I just didn't find that these were as useful as the gun upgrades and stuff like that for your weapon. I didn't use these powers as much. Again, the shock ability is really the only useful ability in the game because it works for all the robotic enemies. It pushes enemies back. You can use it to instantly down more aerial drones that kind of follow you. So, and again, you need them for puzzle solving. So, like that is the first power you get. It's mapped directly to one of the face buttons and cannot be changed. And, it is the most useful power in the game. But the other ones I didn't use quite as much. The gunplay I felt was more than adequate, as well as the shock ability on a lot of those enemies. I didn't have any issues and never died to any of the bosses, because I didn't utilize those powers. It was more so just because of the powerful weaponry that I had at my disposal. So that's the game's combat. Let's talk about story. Now, you probably heard some people criticize this game for its kind of dialogue-heavy moments. The thing is, I don't mind dialogue in games as long as it's interesting dialogue. I'll sit there and I'll play these walking simulators which have just a bunch of dialogues, and stuff throughout the game. And I don't mind sitting through a 20-minute cutscene if it's interesting and really well produced and directed. I don't mind doing that. I'm all for investing myself in a very interesting narrative. This narrative is interesting. It does have some mystery. It does have some horrific elements. It does have some bizarre moments that kind of just make you go, what? It's got some really unique flavors, this narrative. However, I do have to agree with people about the dialogue for this game. Even playing it in the Russian voiceover, I didn't have an issue with the things the characters were saying, although on close inspection, the thing is there's a lot of cultural references that this game kind of throws at you, and if you aren't educated on them, or you don't know, or you don't have the, if you don't look it up and basically educate yourself on it, this stuff kind of just goes across your head and you think it's just stupid, but it doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of cultural references in here that you may just not fully understand unless you are from the actual country and are native to that. But for me, it's like there are a couple things I had to look up because it just seemed a bit bizarre to me. And once I actually learned, oh, this is what the significance of what this person says or what this person keeps saying is, then it makes a little bit more sense. However, back to the dialogue, I have to say I agree with people. I think this was a creative error. I can't even say error because they made it intentionally. I just don't think it was the right decision to have the characters talk as much as they do. In fact, because the characters talk so much, and it's your main character and he's talking to this AI that's within his glove. It basically has all the powers and stuff like that, and he's constantly engaging in conversations with people. There's dead people just laying on the floor, and they have this thing programmed in their brain that allows you to basically talk with them. So it's like their body's dead, but their brain function is partially alive, or it's like their personality or their essence is kind of stuck in there, and it's not quite died out yet, but it's on its way out. Very, very bizarre. But the thing is, you engage in a lot of conversations, and I had an issue with this because it just happens a lot, and it happens so much that it completely removes any of the horror feeling that you would get playing this game. If they made the creative decision to make a silent protagonist and your character didn't have a personality, he didn't talk whatsoever, and it was more like BioShock or more like Half-Life, where you're kind of going through this experience and you are the character, right? You are them going through this, and you're experiencing it through their eyes, and he doesn't talk or he doesn't have a personality because it's supposed to be you interpreting what you're saying. If they went with that perspective, I think it would have been a much better fit for this game. There is too much dialogue happening to the point where it actually removes any of the horror, the scare factor, anything that this game could have had. It actually kind of destroys the atmosphere almost. It's like I can sit here and I can put you in a dark room and put blood on the walls and scary lighting effects and do all these things. But then if I have dialogue happening while all that stuff is going on, it kind of takes your mind off of the atmosphere because you don't really have silence anymore. And that's how important sound design is and just overall for the atmosphere of this game. I felt creatively it was a poor decision. Now, the stuff that they say, I mean, I didn't mind it as much. I actually felt the voice acting was very good for this game. Even playing with the Russian voiceover, I think all the characters sounded appropriate. Everyone's made fun of that fridge that talks to you in a very sexualized way. It doesn't kind of come across as bad in the Russian voiceover as it does with the English. I've seen the videos of it, and it's like, okay, it's very much like in your face. With the Russian voiceover, the way that everyone plays their character is a bit different, more subdued, and I kind of like it, to be quite honest with you. However, there's a critical issue here, a really bad issue that the developers need to fix, because it makes the game nearly, I don't want to say nearly unplayable, but it makes it really, it makes experiencing this part of the game with the Russian voiceover very, very challenging. The subtitles are ridiculously tiny, and there are no accessibility options in this game. There are no options to make the HUD larger, no options to make the subtitles larger. Playing on a 65-inch TV from a normal viewing distance, I had to squint to actually read some of the dialogue in this game, and I was wearing prescription glasses while having to squint to kind of look at what the words were on screen were saying. It is ridiculously tiny. They have normal subtitles that come up at the bottom of the screen, but then they have chat bubbles, almost like Yakuza, except it's really freaking tiny and has like multiple sentences long. It's like reading a paragraph when it's all shrunken down above someone's head. And yeah, even though the game runs at a native 4K resolution on PS5, 60 FPS, you know, the dialogue and the chat bubbles are so tiny. Even the subtitles are so tiny. The HUD itself is so tiny. I actually had to check a couple times, like what power did I have selected, because I couldn't really see the icon that well. And I was wearing prescription glasses. I have, you know, I am nearsighted, so I always wear glasses when I play games because otherwise it looks like I'm playing at 480p basically, right? So I always wear my glasses when I'm playing games, but I don't have an issue at all with just normal subtitles. But with what they decided in this game, if you're not playing on anything but a computer monitor, you're gonna have some major issues kind of reading the subtitles for this game, and there are no options to increase it. In an age where accessibility has become such a prominent thing in gaming, and where gaming has really taken the charge of being very accommodating to people of all different requirements regarding accessibility, this game has nothing in the way of actually making itself more legible, easier to experience. You have a field of view slider, which is nice. They added that in a patch recently, but this is a more egregious issue because someone like myself who wanted to give the game a chance with Russian voiceover and enjoyed the voice acting, it was a challenge, and I know I missed a ton of stuff simply because I couldn't read the subtitles as they were going on. It also doesn't help that there's just a lot of dialogue in general, and so you're essentially looking down at the subtitles more than you are actually looking at the screen playing the game. There's a lot of just, I mean, the characters engage in full-on conversations, multiple sentences long, there's dialogue options and stuff like that. I just felt creatively it would have been better to take more of a BioShock approach. In fact, they have some of these elements where you can find you can find audio logs and stuff from different characters that talk more about the world and whatnot, but not all of them are as interesting, and not all of them are even as useful to listen to. Many times you enter a room and your AI companion in your glove will start explaining the history of the laboratory, and it's like, okay, why not just do it how BioShock did it and find like an audio recording that talks about this certain area and its relevance to where you are, and just have that be that, you know, why do it in this fashion? I just felt creatively it was a really big misstep, and again, it only hurts even more so when you can't even read the dialogue from the subtitles properly. This is an issue. It needs to be patched out. And if you are planning to play the game, and I highly do recommend that you play this game with the Russian VO, it is definitely a worthy experience, and the dialogue comes across a lot better. But wait until they patch the game with more legible subtitles, because how it is right now is just really, really bad. It's almost unreadable, and I'm not even exaggerating there. There are a lot of dialogue things that I just missed entirely because it was just too tiny to read the text. This is an egregious issue, and it needs to be patched, and I hope that they're working on this as soon as possible, because otherwise it's just going to lead more people to play it in English. Most people are not going to have the patience to squint their eyes, especially when they're already wearing prescription glasses to take care of any of the visibility issues. I still had to do that, and again, you know, it's not like the TV is like, you know, hundreds of feet away from me. It's at a normal viewing distance on a 65-inch TV. You can't see shit. There's nothing else for me to say. You just can't see shit. So that needs a patch desperately from the core game experience. The very last thing I want to touch upon is the actual visual and sound quality. All right, now the graphics of this game are phenomenal for the most part. I think this game does an incredible job with its art direction, and honestly, this might just be a potential winner for the end of the year Game Awards with the best art direction in a video game. It just astounds you, and they do such a good job with the variety of art as well. Mostly when you're working with materials like this, a lot of metal, a lot of stone and concrete, things can look kind of samey if you don't know how to, you know, meticulously and carefully place them throughout the world, but the artist did an incredible job here. The assets of the game remain super high quality, super high detailed. I really thought the game kind of elicited a next generation experience. Even though this is a cross-gen game, I got the impression that I was playing a game that was taking really good advantage of the PlayStation 5. There is no ray tracing in this game, nothing in the way of super advanced technology. Although that apparently is coming later on in the patch, at least for the PC side. But as the game stands right now on PlayStation 5, it runs at a native 4K and at 60 frames per second with very, very few dips. There's a handful of dips when things get busy, but it's only to like the mid 50s, if that. This game is for the most part a consistently solid 60 FPS with no dips whatsoever. And so it's very playable, it's very enjoyable, the gunplay feels fantastic, the game looks fantastic. It's really only the outdoor section where you can kind of notice where the limitations of the game's lighting systems are. The game has really poor indirect lighting. If you watch the Digital Foundry video, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. But basically, different areas in the game where objects are in very close proximity to each other, there's like no shadows. You know, it looks almost like the game has no ambient occlusion whatsoever, but that's not the case. The game also doesn't have any HDR support, and in a game that's this beautiful, with a world that's this interesting to look at, it's quite a shame that this game has nothing in the way of HDR support. I said the same thing about Stray earlier last year. That's another game that just had a really great art direction, really beautiful world that doesn't have HDR support, and it's the same thing with this game, unfortunately. I really hope that they add it in later on in a patch, but it's a game that you could really kind of, imagine would be really just even more gorgeous than it already is with HDR support, with bright highlights and very vivid colors and stuff. So unfortunately it doesn't have that, but it is a very attractive game. The interiors look fantastic in the game. There is no day and night cycle, so it's always a fixed time of day. It's always sunny outside, and I just think the whole game just looks good on a whole. There are only certain parts where you can look at the game and you can see some of the limitations, but the game doesn't really showcase those elements quite frequently. It only comes up during certain times when you're playing the game. But I think this game looks fantastic, and to me it does provide a next-gen experience. I love being able to see the arm hair on your character kind of stick out in like a 3D geometry. That was one of the coolest elements I saw when I first looked at the gameplay. I was like, oh, you can see the arm hair on the character. They actually have it in the full game. So next-gen arm hair, it's here. And let's talk about the soundtrack. I had to run out and buy this soundtrack immediately. Mick Gordon, who is the composer behind the Doom games, as well as other games. I think he did the Prey reboot as well. Different games for like Bethesda. You know, he's definitely worked a lot with video games now. He has done the soundtrack for this game, and my God, it's phenomenal. You can immediately see his influence when the game gets really heavy with the combat. You have just this really incredible, this really cool like rock and roll soundtrack almost, and then these really nice electronic themes that kind of embed themselves within that, just to create this really unique sounding experience. When the combat kicks up, I can't tell you the amount of times I was like, like banging my head to like the music while I was actually doing the combat and the shooting of the game. All of this just makes the gunplay feel even better to actually control, because you get this kick-ass soundtrack with this great musical score. It has a lot of different rhythms, and it's both analog and more electronic beats together just to create something very unique, and it's just with really fast gunplay. I love the soundtrack in this game. I had to go out and buy it like immediately after playing this game, and it's also licensed music as well. It's not just an original score. They use a bunch of licensed music that is in Russian, mind you, so you get the cultural elements of having different styles of music that you might have not been expecting in this game. And with Mick Gordon's signature flavor of just creating this really awesome sounding, very provocative type of music that just, again, works its way and weaves its way into the excellent combat system, it's phenomenal. The soundtrack of this game is great. It's fun to listen to, and it's one that I'm going to listen to outside of the game itself. So if you're a fan of like how the Doom Eternal soundtrack is, and all of Mick Gordon's work with his previous projects, this game is not going to disappoint. And he also is going to be doing the soundtrack for that game Routine, which is the other game that's part of this collection of Trinity games that I kept talking about in my unboxing. So that's going to be exciting to see, and I'm just glad he's finding a lot of success and doing projects like this, which I think it was just a perfect mashup for. So The music in this game is phenomenal. It is equally just as great as the world building and the gunplay and all the great things that this game has to offer. I think at the end of the day here, Atomic Heart is just this interesting experience that takes your expectations, throws them out the window, and then plays gives you this very unique, bizarre, sometimes overwhelming gameplay experience, and just again, it changes genres kind of on the fly like it's a chameleon. It's this really bizarre type of game that I can't recall I ever played something similar like it, at least in a very long time. And it does a lot of things very well, but it does have some faults. It does, I think, again, it's a little bit too ambitious for its own good. It's a victim of its own creativity in that respect. So for a sequel, a potential sequel, I would really like to see them do something that's a little bit more focused, perhaps slightly smaller, but still has a more powerful and stronger narrative, and again kind of tones down the dialogue in place for you kind of leaving it up to your own interpretation of things, because I do feel like that does destroy the atmosphere just a bit in this game. Again, when all the characters are just talking and stuff like that, it doesn't exactly elicit the same feeling. But that being said, this game is phenomenal. I do think it is worth playing, and I had a great time playing it, and absolutely it is one of the standout experiences that I played, not only this year but in recent memory as well. If you see it on sale, or if again this is a game that you feel comfortable with taking a chance on, I won't say that you'll enjoy every single element of it, but the things it does very, very, very well, and that gunplay is just phenomenal. It's the best part of this game is the combat, and when everything meshes together and you have all the upgrades for your weapons, and you're just like in the middle fighting these really cool bosses that are jumping around and just doing all this really cool stuff. It's very, very exciting, and yeah, I had a good time playing this game. It's just not what I was expecting, but again, that's not a bad thing at all. I feel that these days it's much rarer for a game to kind of shatter your expectations and to give you something that's very unique. And I think Death Stranding was like that. It was like the last game I played that kind of gave a similar descriptive feeling where you just didn't know what to expect. And with Atomic Heart, you went in with expectations, but it gave you something else, almost something completely different entirely. So that being said, I had a great time playing Atomic Heart. Definitely one of the more standout experiences. I'm glad it did come out, and I'm glad that we do have it, and I'm glad, yeah, that I was able to sit here and talk about it for you guys, and hope you guys enjoyed this review. For those of you who have played it, let me know about your thoughts. Do you agree with sort of the points that I mentioned here, some of the criticisms that I had? I'd be very interested to know what you guys think as well. I think this is a game that is going to be very different for just about everyone. Everyone's going to have their own different take and interpretation on things. But for me, I have to say that I really, really enjoyed it most of the whole way through. I thought it was very, very fun. So, all right, I'll talk with you guys later. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you for the next one.